Hola, mis estudiantes. Welcome to the final part of the lecture from Tuesday night. This is points 6 and 7 from lecture number 4 from Empire to Revolution. Hope you guys are staying warm. It's nasty outside. At least the streets are dry now, so that's good. Also, I apologize for any background noise. My dishwasher's going, and if my dog decides to, he's a puppy, if he decides to get the squeaky toy, we'll have to bear through it. So that's just the way it is. I trying my best to control him right now. And I want to start off with my obligatory, since this is the first sort of video thing I've done with you guys. My joke is that there's my $250,000 piece of artwork behind me. Yeah, there you go. My non-existent grandchildren will be paying for all that. So, but let's start with point number 6. You know, we ended with the French and Indian War, and there's all this war debt, and England is like, you guys are going to have to start, paying your share. And so this is where Great Britain is going to shift from salutary neglect to these imperial reforms, and the colonists are not going to like this. And here, the one thing I want to say about all of this is that British Parliament is going to pass these laws, these new acts, and the colonists aren't going to like them, and for the most part, they're going to be repealed. They're going to be taken away. The king will either get rid of them or Parliament will get rid of them. So this classic narrative that we have in the United States that it was the tyrannical King George, there was really no tyranny here. The Parliament would actually listen to the colonists, and they were trying to find some sort of bridge between England and the American colonies to where they could just be profitable again. And also, many colonists enjoyed having England as their parent. So, the narratives that we've created in pop culture of, everyone was about the American Revolution and everyone was gung-ho and it was the evil British versus the good Americans. It's much more gray than that. But let's look at some of these taxes here. Now, there's going to be a massive amount of acts. I've highlighted some of the key ones here. There's a Hat Act. There's the Hat Act was a tax on hats. But let's look at the Sugar Act. And the Sugar Act of 1764 is actually going to lower the tax on sugar. And if you look at the numbers, it goes down considerably what is expected to be paid. But the difference is that now, in this post-French and Indian War era, the colonists are actually expected to pay this tax. So there's not only going to be a sort of crackdown on making people pay their taxes, but there's also going to be this sort of, crackdown on smuggling as well. So a lot of what the colonists are upset about is that they're actually having to abide by the law for the first time. And, I alluded to some examples in class, but, we've all been on a highway in Oklahoma and we see the sign that says 70 miles an hour. And if you're driving 70 miles an hour on a highway in Oklahoma that has a 70 mile an hour speed limit, you're getting passed by most people. This would be like if all of a sudden the Oklahoma Highway Patrol started enforcing anyone going 71 miles per hour got pulled over and got a ticket. People wouldn't be happy about it. Now the American colonists are having to actually pay their taxes, and there's a crackdown on smuggling. Now we'll talk about the Sons of Liberty a little bit more in the next lecture, but this group, the Sons of Liberty, other groups like this form to rebel against these taxes. Now, the Sugar Act, okay, we're not getting there quite yet. The next one is the biggie, the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act is a tax on paper goods, and it ranges from everything from marriage certificates, death certificates, wills, legal documents, etc. This is not a tax on like mailing stamps. And basically, if you had a legal document, they even included playing cards as legal documents. If you had a legal document, you had to pay for this stamp to be put on it, which was a tax. Now, why this one is important? We got to think. A lot of these acts are going to affect smugglers and people like that. This act affects this very special class of people that we still have around today, and your opinion on them may vary. But those people are called lawyers. And this tax greatly affected lawyers. And lawyers wield power. They have influence in the community. They're educated. They know how to organize. So this tax really is the one that gets things really moving in the colonial period to get the colonists to start moving forward. But just like the other taxes, the Stamp Act will be repealed. And when it's repealed, everybody's happy or whatever. But it's simply this fact that the British Crown is now expecting people to actually pay their taxes. The Stamp Act, which brought up a fervor amongst lots of people in the colonies, goes away. It is then replaced by new taxes or duties on glass, paint, lead, tea, other things. This is the tea tax, that will lead eventually to the Boston, we'll eventually get the Boston Tea, we'll get the Tea Act that will come in 1773. But so they go away from taxing sort of legal documents in general to taxing specific goods. And that is expressly going to hurt smugglers again. There's mass resistance to the Townshend Act. Now, I want you to think about this. So this is the era where colonials, they start to tar and feather tax collectors. Now, I don't know if you know what tarring and feathering really entails, but it's like hot tar. Like, this is stuff that is burnt. This isn't like they're throwing syrup on tax collectors. They're throwing hot tar on tax collectors, which will burn their skin. Now, I have to tread lightly here, because I'm certainly not trying to make our founding fathers and these people seem horrible. But they are violating what essentially could be considered federal laws coming from England in order to effect change. If you do that, that's called terrorism. They are being simply asked to follow the laws that have been put in place by the Crown. The big difference here is that, and I might as well get into it right now, the colonists had developed their own governments, and they felt that they should make the laws for themselves. So this brings up two things, and I'm not, this is something that you can include in your essay. I'm not going to probably ask any short answer questions about this, but it's called virtual versus actual representation. So the colonists wanted actual representation. They wanted their colonial assemblies to make laws, and they wanted people to have a say. They wanted there to be colonials in Parliament back in England to have a say. England believed in virtual representation. And virtual representation basically dictated that, no, you are represented, even though you don't have representatives in Parliament. You are represented because the crown, the English crown, the English empire, wants what is best for you and the empire. And so what is best for the empire is best for you. And I know it sounds like I'm talking about Star Wars, talking about the empire. But the English would argue that we're not going to pass laws that are meant to hurt you. We're passing laws so we can continue to protect you and keep money and funds up so we can protect you. The colonists don't see it that way. Now, could the course of human history been changed if Parliament would have allowed there to be colonial representation in Parliament? Probably. It would have been a step in the right direction. But we go back and we talk about that idea that Parliament in England did not really respect the American colonists and find them necessarily fit to have those type of positions. So let's go back. The Townshend Acts are in place. People don't like it. And then we get to the quote-unquote Boston Massacre. Okay. You can go look up Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre. And if you look at it, it looks like there's a line of British soldiers firing into a group of peaceful colonists. This was not the case. It was at night in Boston, and you had British patrols out patrolling the streets. There weren't police forces at the time. The army sort of did that. And the colonists didn't like the British presence there. They felt it was, infringing upon their rights. And so these colonists started harassing these British troops. Well, these British troops are like 16 to 18-year-olds in a foreign land, and here they are having insults and rocks hurled at them. And then by all accounts of the actual happenings, the initial firing into the crowd was an accident. So much so that the troops that were charged in the Boston Massacre were actually represented by John Adams, who got them out of murder charges, because it wasn't murder. It wasn't really even a massacre. But it does become a symbol, and part of that is that propaganda that is put out by Paul Revere and his engraving of the situation. So Boston has become the hub of sort of resistance at this point, even though the call for independence is eventually going to come from Virginia. In 1773, Britain is sitting on a ton of tea. They have all this tea from their holdings in Southeast Asia and that region, in Afghanistan, India, etc. And so they are going to allow, in the Tea Act, the British East India Company to sell tea at a lower price. Okay. Well, what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that there were taxes on the tea, and they were expected to be paid. The other problem is those smugglers again. Those Sons of Liberties headed up by Samuel Adams, who was making their money smuggling tea, and they were smuggling Dutch tea. Because Dutch tea was much, much better than this tea that the British had been sitting on. It had basically been sitting around. They were trying to unload it because they had too much of it. And the rebellion here that becomes the Boston Tea Party comes from these smugglers feeling like they're losing their money because they can no longer illegally smuggle this Dutch tea. And I know it sounds crazy to talk about tea so much, but we have to remember, even to today, the English love their tea. I mean, tea time is a part of the day. Maybe it's not the same as we do here because, we drink iced tea, or if you're from the South, sweet tea. But nevertheless, the colonists, led by the Sons of Liberty, break onto ships in Boston Harbor, and they throw 342 chests of tea into the harbor. Now, the story is they dressed up like Indians. They put some face paint on and maybe put a feather in their hair. Everybody knew who they were. They will say, oh, we broke in, we were protesting the Tea Act. We threw the tea in the harbor, but we replaced the lock that we broke. But the problem is that tea belonged to the British government. And so once again, you have colonists destroying government property in order to effect change. So the colonists are being belligerent and the British are being obstinate, meaning that no one is coming to any agreements here. Well, because of the Boston Tea Party, we end up getting what are known as the Coercive Acts, is what the British called them, or the Americans called them the Intolerable Acts. And this is where they closed the port of Boston. So the British basically put a blockade around it, closed the port of Boston. Everything is going to be regulated. Smuggling is going to take a huge hit. The Massachusetts Government Act will end self-rule. the British Crown will take over control of Massachusetts. And then the one that's really misunderstood is the Quartering Act, which required colonists to house British soldiers. Now, it did. It did require a colonist, if the British Army came to you and said, we need you to put these soldiers up, you had to do it. You also got paid for it. So while it was an infringement upon people's private property, they were also getting paid for it. So it wasn't sort of the narrative that we've created of, oh, the Brits are here, give me your house. No, that's not what's going on. So all I'm trying to say here is that this is a much grayer situation than, our popular culture has made it out to be. This isn't good versus evil. This is stubborn versus stubborn, basically. Well, after the coercive acts, we move on to point 7 here, colonial disaffection and the road to revolution. Once again, the colonists believe that they want this actual representation. They don't buy into this virtual representation. And so we get the First Continental Congress in 1774. And this is a loose organization of the colonies. Now we have to remember, these colonies all still view themselves as individual entities. They don't view themselves as the United Colonies of America or the United States of America. They view themselves as, we're Georgia, we're North Carolina, we're Virginia. They come together and they basically do two things. They decide that they are going to give the Suffolk Resolves, which talk about how oppressive the coercive acts are and that they have to be repealed. Now, the coercive acts were put in place to basically pay for the damages from the Boston Tea Party. And then the Continental Association, which is a part of the Continental Congress, decides that they're going to boycott British goods. And this is probably the most effective aspect. We'll find out, especially if you take modern U.S. history and you talk about the American Civil Rights Movement, boycotting goods is, the whole reason that there was integration in Montgomery, Alabama was because of the Montgomery bus boycott. And boycotting goods is a good way to strike at the economic side of the British Empire. Well, in the interim period, colonists begin stockpiling weapons. They begin forming militias. Again, we don't have a standardized colonial army yet. It's going to be lots of militias that are forming. And then eventually by 1776, this dissatisfaction will have transformed into a revolutionary movement. In our next lecture on Tuesday, we will talk about the revolution, the things that sort of fueled the revolution, etc. But I just want you to remember this. The popular narrative of freedom versus tyranny doesn't really play. There was not necessarily tyranny. There was differences in governance ideas, and there were differences in, basically just the stubbornness of both sides to work out a deal. So, anyways, I hope you guys are staying warm, like I said. Come next Tuesday with any questions about the study guide. I hope you have a good rest of the week. And as always, be safe and make good decisions. Peace.